Okay, so this lesson is on layer adjustments to manipulate your image, such as color correction or contrast. And so we're going to get started here. I'm going to go ahead and select the image of the forest, okay? And you'll notice that my history palette is up, my properties palette is up, my layers palette is up, my adjustment layers, and all these that are here. This is by going to the window and selecting the workspace essentials, okay? Or you can do reset essentials. Now the palettes that we're going to be focusing on are actually going to be this adjustment palette and the layers palette, because this is where we're going to create the adjustments, okay? So if I wanted to add an adjustment, such as changing the color, like the hue, saturation of this image, what I would want to do is select the image, go into the adjustments button here, and I would go into hue saturation. And what you'll notice is that it created a hue saturation above the image. Similarly, I could have gone here and selected hue saturation and clicked it, and it would have added it right above that item. Okay. Right now you can't tell what hue saturation does because I haven't changed any of the settings, so we're gonna focus on this properties palette. You're gonna move this to the left, you're gonna move this to the right, and you're gonna see some changes. Okay. Now notice that as I'm affecting these, even though my intention was only to manipulate the forest image, you'll notice this girl is also changing as I move these sliders across. Okay? So what's important to know is that layer modes apply to any layers that are beneath them unless you specify them not to. And the way that I would specify them not to, I'm going to go ahead and make the change so you can see. If I only wanted it to apply to this picture here, I would need to go in between these two items, and I want to hold down the Alt key, and see when you see that little indicator there with the little arrow pointing down, that means it's going to link this particular adjustment layer to this particular image. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click it, and you'll notice that the girl is going to change. Okay, she went back to her normal self, and this one kept the application of that adjustment layer. And notice I could turn these off and on. Okay, you might find other places to manipulate the color image, such as in image here, and there's like these auto tones and auto contrast, things like that. There's also these adjustments where you could do them here. If you go and you do some of these in here instead of doing them as adjustments in here, then what will happen is that you're not going to be able to undo those if you don't like them. The nice thing about this is that it's not permanent. It's not really messing with the image's true data. So at any time, if I say, oh, that's a little too green, can you change that? I would suggest it looks a little too hyper. Can you change that? You could just go into that layer, okay, and you could modify it here. Okay, and this is in the adjustment layer. Okay, so you might tone it down to there. Okay. Other adjustment layers, I'm just going to go ahead and select the flower layer here just so that it creates my adjustment layer on top of that. I'm going to do an adjustment layer such as levels. I'm showing you the most important ones. Levels allows you to manipulate the contrast of an image, but do so very subtly, okay? So you can move in your white point, okay, to where you get it where you like it, and then you can move in your black point. Okay, notice because it's at the very top, it's applying to everything. If I only want it to apply to the flower, then I would need to link it. I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Option key on a Mac or Alt key on a PC, and I'm going to click it. And notice it just left it applied to this particular image. We can turn it on and turn it off so you can see the difference. Okay. The cool thing again about it, not permanent. We want everything to not be permanent. That's why we like masks instead of eraser tool. That's why we like adjustment layers instead of plain manipulations that are permanent, such as the auto tone and auto contrast that I mentioned here, okay? So you can improve your contrast here instead of doing it over there. There will be times where this adjustment isn't doing what you want and you will need to directly apply it to the image, so that's why that other option is there, okay? Now, for other subtle tweaking of color, I'm going to go ahead and grab this image here. And I'm going to do another adjustment, and I'm going to do color balance. And this allows you, say that her face is too pink or not yellow enough, or whatever you want to change the skin tone color, you can do things like this. Notice I'm removing some of the red and adding more blue. So her face, this little kind of flush area that she has here is, I'm going to just go ahead and zoom into it. This little flush area that she has here, when I manipulate this, you can see it kind of going away, okay? But it is also adding some more blue to the eyes and to anywhere else in the image where it applies, okay? So you can manipulate this, like you can add more red or you can take away. Now this is a way that you can correct your old photographs. Sometimes they're kind of tinted, they look kind of yellow and dingy. You can always auto-correct them if you wanted to. Now there's other adjustment layers in here that you can go and check out. Okay, I'm not going to go over all of them, but you have things to turn things black and white, to adjust the curves, and to posterize, just different things, okay? Some of these down here are not recommended, like posterize and threshold, because they start doing really weird, funky stuff like this. And then it doesn't end up looking like an image. We want this poster to look more like imagery, okay? I'm going to undo that. Okay, now you know how to do adjustments, and you've learned how to do the selections in the selections video. So how do you combine these two, and how does that work? Okay, well, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and grab my circle marquee here. I'm going to circle her eye pupil here. Okay. Now I'm not trying to change her red eye to normal. I'm actually going to change it to something completely different. So what I can do is, as long as I go to the girl layer, make sure I'm on the girl layer here, I'm going to go into adjustment layer. And I'm going to do hue saturation. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tweak this. Okay. Now if you look at here, what you'll notice is that it created the adjustment on a separate layer just like it did here. However, it has this filled in with black. And that is because, well, we're going to learn about those masks a little bit more, how you hand make them. And when you're masking black, eliminates information. So in here, there's a speck of white that you can't see that's revealing this here. But basically, you can pinpoint, because of the selection that we made, what areas you manipulate. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give her a purple eye. And then I'm going to link that adjustment to that picture so it applies. Okay, so it's manipulating that eyeball there. Okay. Similarly, if you only wanted to manipulate, say, this part of the image, I'm going to try my lasso tool. Okay. And notice there's a 30 feather up here. And then I'm going to go to that picture of the flower, which is here. And I'm going to select it, and I'm going to go to adjustments. And I'm going to do a hue saturation, and I'm going to manipulate the color. Okay. And if I wanted to make that gradate a little bit better where it isn't as feathered, I can go into this option here in the properties palette. Notice this is where I manipulate the adjustment layer, and here's where I could manipulate the mask, which is this area here. I could go and change the feather here. Okay. All right, so you can modify your adjustment layers by selecting them and then going into the properties palette and selecting the appropriate area. And then you can go into the masks and also adjust them, such as feather and the density, which we talked about earlier. Okay, now say that you did want a to turn all of these one color. You could just go to the very top of your layers palette, okay, which is here. You would go to adjustment layers and say that I wanted to colorize this with hue saturation. Okay, I'm going to click colorize. It's going to change it a little bit. It'll kind of give you a duotone effect here. Say that I wanted to turn this kind of into this weird blue color that is often used in movies. We would just add that adjustment layer at the very top and let it affect everything beneath it, okay? So as you know, there's many other adjustments. Go ahead, play around, see what they do, see what works for you in the look you're trying to achieve, okay? They're also located here. All right, this concludes your lesson on adjustment layers and what they can do for your image. If you have any questions, iled@hawaii.edu or 808-343-9565.